Oh boy, buckle up. This probably isn't going to start where you might expect. We're going back to 1944, and we've got a long way to go on this one. Richard Turkowski was the son of a military man, Thaddeus Turkowski. Thaddeus was the recipient of the Grand Cross of the Order of the Virtui Militari, the highest military decoration in Poland. During World War II, which took place between 1939 and 1945, Thaddeus Turkowski was summoned back into service. Before departing, he gifted his son Richard with his lucky knife and told him that he was going to be the man of the house now. He needed to take care of his mother. Richard was perhaps between 12 and 15 years old, still quite young. But in 1944, Thaddeus Turkowski was killed in battle. His wife and son were left to make their way through this violent, frightening era without him. After his father's death, Richard befriends a girl named Rose. Rose is from a Jewish family, though it's unclear if they are a family being hidden within or near the home, or if she's just a neighbor of the Turkowskis. Rose and Richard played together in a hedge maze, and Richard takes to sketching the girl. He's quite a talented artist, and Rose is a wonderful model. Richard's mother remarries soon after the death of his father. At this perilous time in history, she needs someone who can provide for the family and protect the family. With Thaddeus gone, they're vulnerable. And the man she marries is a short-tempered, insecure alcoholic who projects his own shortcomings and failures into the actions of others towards him. Any perceived slight is an attack on his fragile ego and authority. He's an absolute terror upon Richard and his mother. What security he may have contributed to this family unit turned out to be a total myth. He was naught but a drain upon them. Richard seems to be a withdrawn, quiet, gentle child, yet even he is pushed into lashing out against his stepfather with violence, striking at him with a knife his father gifted him before his death. He did so to avoid a beating during one of his stepfather's strange games of, "Bring me the unnamed item that I want." Richard has vivid memories of his mother being dragged through the house and assaulted. The boy blamed himself for not being able to protect her, compared himself to his father, cursed himself for it, and deemed violence the only answer to what was happening in his father's absence, mimicking the language used by his stepfather in the process. In the weeks and months to come, Rose begins to become withdrawn from Richard at the hedge maze. Richard, too, seems to disengage from their games. There's a great deal of stress on the two children. Rose can't get food, and the girl seems to be weakening. Richard brings her food when he can, though eventually, all he can get to her is moldy bread and a half pint of milk from a dirty bottle. Rose never expresses anything but gratitude for this, though. Their games end, but the two remain close. But during one of their meetings, after Rose expresses concern for Richard's well-being, the boy verbally lashes out at Rose. Anger is beginning to broil within the child. He's dancing with the behaviors of his stepfather. Richard's mother eventually finds a way out, a way to handle the stepfather. In the dark of the night, a group of men arrive at their home. The stepfather is labeled as a collaborator, a son of Poland who acted with her oppressor. There are accusations brought against him that someone is being hidden in the pantry under the floorboards. Imagine what Polish men would do to a sympathizer of Nazi Germany in the mid-1940s. Imagine what they'd do to a man that possibly hid them under his floorboards. Well, it involves a noose, a box, and a rafter. Now, whether these accusations are true or not, I can't really say. I can be swayed either way. After the hanging, Richard returns to the hedge maze, waiting for Rose, looking for Rose, but she never reappears alive. The girl is dead. With this death, Richard despairs that he has nothing left, that he is nothing. With Rose's passing, a seeming imprint is made on the boy, a fixation on this prepubescent love. Wires are crossed in his developing brain. It is just as troubling as you might imagine it to be. What Richard loses with Rose will come back to haunt him much, much later in life. Now, we remain in the 1940s in the World War II era, but we go to a different story, that of Thomas Rekovich. Thomas's parents died when he was 3 years old in the Warsaw Uprising, which took place between August 1st and October 2nd of 1944. When the uprising was over, Nazi forces razed and destroyed the city on their way out as an act of reprisal, and little Thomas Rekovich was taken with them. Human experimentation at the hands of Nazi doctors and scientists was brutal and unchecked. That is a fact. Even at the end of World War II, passes were given to these monsters in exchange for their data and services to other countries. In May of 1945, when Germany surrendered, the Red Army entered the scene, the Soviet Union, and little Thomas Rekovich fell into their custody. Taken to the Soviet Union and imprisoned there for years, experimented on for years. They wanted to find out what made little Thomas so special. When Thomas was 18 years old, he escaped. The scientists that held him captive suffered a great deal during his departure. You see, Thomas was a medium, a strong one, strong enough to have been noticed at the age of 3. He can enter into the minds of others. It's unknown if he was born with all of these abilities, or if experimentation at the hands of the Nazis and then Soviets created some. But by the age of 18, he could walk through the minds and memories of others, piece together the puzzles that compose a person, and there are 2 sides of Thomas that interact as one soul, as a pair of soulmates, the real Thomas and then the spirit Thomas. The 2 even have different personalities and share in conversation when the real Thomas releases the spirit Thomas. The real-world Thomas is a bit neurotic and bull-headed, whereas the other Thomas, the spirit Thomas, is more relaxed and sure-thinking. Thomas made his way to Poland, took a factory job. Eventually, he met Richard Tarkowski, who had gone on to become a student of the arts, an aspiring painter. He was a fair bit older than Thomas and took an interest in the young man. He could tell there was something special about him, of sort of madness in his eyes. The 2 became friends. Thomas tells him of otherworldly, bizarre dreamscapes, things he never would have thought possible, and with such fine detailing that Richard is able to paint the things that Thomas sees. It becomes a habit of the 2 to regularly gather and share in Thomas's imagination and visions, Richard not realizing how spectacularly different Thomas actually was. But Richard's interest in the beauty of Thomas's mind made the world far less lonely for the young, struggling man. It was a direly necessary friendship. Richard tries to convince Thomas to go to university, to become a painter, but Thomas didn't feel called into artistic endeavors. He agreed to pursue higher education, to pursue something beyond factory work, but studied to become an architect rather than an artist. At university, Thomas meets his future wife. Richard becomes quite jealous of this, though he acknowledges his own jealousy in writings. Eventually, he is able to accept Thomas's love interest after meeting her and accepting her intellect and that she made his friend happy. In the late 1960s, Richard learns of a resort project in the making and pulls as many strings as he can to get Thomas a job on the project as an architect. This drives Thomas away from Richard, but he wants to help his friend. Richard says, "He was the closest to a son that I'd ever had." Thomas loves designing and helping build this idyllic resort that he would dub Niva. The Niva Workers' Resort was a place where the working class of Poland could bring their family to have a time of leisure while surrounded by nature. It was dubbed the new center of the socialist joy and recreation. Niva was a very large, complex structure. The amazing work performed by Thomas during the building's construction gave him enough pull with the Polish United Workers' Party to get a position as the building manager after its grand opening in 1969. During the construction of Niva, Thomas and his wife had their first child, a girl they named Lillian. Thomas seemed quite suited for fatherhood. After such a troubling, frightening start to life, he'd gone on to find stability and happiness. He overcame such great odds. After fleeing from the Soviet Union, Thomas never used his medium abilities. Spirit Thomas still existed, of course. I'm sure the 2 interacted from time to time, but there was no jumping into people's brains or destroying a lab full of scientists. After Neva was finished, a bunker was found hidden in the forest near the resort, a relic from Nazi occupation during World War II. It was deep in the earth and surrounded by cement. Efforts began to unearth and clear out the tunnels of the bunker to turn it into a nuclear shelter. And in step with this, Thomas discovered a way to turn a small area into a place the other world could not exist. It could act as a barrier between himself and the other place beyond the veil. He could be alone. It could be quiet. This bunker and this discovery will be important to Thomas at a later time. When their second child, Marianne, was born, tragedy came to the small family. Thomas's wife, the mother of the now 2 girls, died during the birth. As Lily grew older, she began to have troubles. She was gifted as a medium like her father, and Lily resented little Marianne for taking her mother. Thomas writes that Lily is too young to really understand that Marianne isn't at fault for what happened, but he fears that Lillian will do something to Marianne out of hatred, though he tries to keep telling himself that no, Lily would never do anything to harm Marianne, though everyone has their demons, don't they? Eventually, Richard, Thomas's dear old friend, takes a position at the Neva resort. Richard seems to have lost his position at the university he worked at. He was kicked out, in fact. Thomas doesn't seem overly worried over the exact reasons, and he invites his old friend to stay at Neva to start teaching classes there. The therapies that helped Thomas so much, that expression and describing of what he saw beyond the veil, well, it might help Lily too. She is entrusted into his care. Richard is welcomed into their home. He's treated as family. Richard develops a close friendship with a nurse named Ursula. When Ursula expresses romantic interest in Richard, he rejects her, saying that he's too damaged to fulfill her wants and needs. Life and its struggles have left him a changed man. This is an extremely painful rejection for Ursula, but there's more to that reasoning, more than just I'm too damaged for love. There's an insidious truth concealed in his words. Richard begins abusing Lillian, molesting her. A darkness begins to stir within Lily. She begins to viciously act out against her father and her sister. In the quiet storm that followed her outbursts against her father when she screams out that she hates them, that no one understands, the sweet, soft voice of the Maw appeared, whispering a gentle, "I do." The Maw told the girl that it understood her pain, and she listened to its sweet, cooing comforts in those moments of silence. Another predator appears in Lily's life. Thomas begins to have suspicions that Lillian's behavior has something to do with Richard. When she was 13 years old, Thomas acted on those suspicions and breaks into Richard's office at Neva, looking for proof of anything. And there, he takes a moment of solace, observing his pocket watch, a gift from his departed wife. It's long since stopped working, but he's kept it all these years. The real Thomas releases the other Thomas, his spirit side, to aid in the search. The spirit Thomas keeps him grounded and helps direct him towards the proof he seeks. Thomas finds a sketchbook hidden in a compartment behind a small picture on the wall. The sketchbook is full of obsessive images of his daughter, of Lily. We don't see how explicit these images are, but based on his reaction, his rage, it's not difficult to imagine how sickening it is. The spirit Thomas brings the real Thomas down, telling him that murder would be unwise. Instead, let him handle it. He will take care of Richard. When Richard returns to the office, carrying a second sketchbook of dark imagery possibly inspired by the lurking figure called the Maw, Thomas is waiting for him. The other Thomas is waiting as well. The real Thomas brings the older man down with ease and little effort, and the spirit Thomas enters Richard's mind. He travels through his memories, understands how he became this sick man. At the center of this place, he finds a disgusting, thrashing monster called Childeater, and the frightened child spirit of Richard, who begs for Thomas's help in escaping from the monster. Thomas offers him no mercy. He severs Richard's spirit from his body. What is left at the end is the shell of a human. The lights are on, but nobody's home. All that lives on, all that's left of Richard's soul, is that foul creature called Childeater. Now, this attack took place at Neva, a government-owned resort. There was an investigation into what happened to Richard, but there was no evidence of foul play. In fact, there was no evidence of anything being wrong with the man. Very strange. And it caught the attention of the security services of Poland, their equivalent to the secret police. The security services had a file on what happened in the Soviet Union in the 1950s, when an unnamed person took out an entire lab of Soviet scientists. They labeled it as the Gemini case. And what happened to Richard is a bit too similar to what happened in the Soviet Union to those scientists. Too similar to be ignored. Remember, after fleeing the Soviet Union and going back to Poland, Thomas did not continue to use his abilities, certainly not on people. This is the first lead in their top-secret Gemini case in years. Of course, someone would investigate, and that someone would be a man named Henry Wilk. Henry Wilk was abused as a child. His father, Jacob Wilk, was a butcher, and much like Richard's stepfather, Henry's father was an absolute terror and a tyrant. He forced Henry at a very, very young age to kill and butcher pigs. Henry may not have been devoid of empathy and compassion at birth, but he certainly grew into it. He entered the secret services of Poland in 1979, and by 1982, he was working a case against his own father. In 1983, he arrested his own father for stealing meat products that were meant for the working people of the Republic. After World War II, many European countries went through supply shortages, increased debt and rationing, if not famine. Poland was no exception. Theft from the people was punishable by death. During the interrogation of his father, Henry displays a very suppressed rage at his father's unwillingness to respect him. When faced with his crime, his father asks where someone would get the idea that he'd been stealing. And Henry very oddly replies, "Well, you've been a very bad boy." And his father begs forgiveness from Henry. It's a very weird dynamic between the two. In newspapers, Henry is described as very calm and cool, a true patriot who's uncovered an entire ring involved in the meat product theft. We'll see later that he tends to come alive when certain violent interrogations begin. Henry becomes very, very good at his work, but at times just seems to barely keep something destructive bottled up. When Henry is handed the Gemini case in 1983, it leads him straight to Thomas Rukovich. He takes his time studying Thomas and his family from a distance for a number of weeks, though by July of 1983, Thomas catches on to Henry's presence and is suspicious of someone watching him and his family. Thomas manages to get his hands on Henry's briefcase, which, amongst other things, holds the Gemini case file and Henry's identification. Henry is driven into an unthinking rage. He attacks Thomas, losing all composure and abandoning any chance at secrecy he may have still had. This is not a calm, collected officer of the secret police. His failure in his mission and failure to outmaneuver Thomas very quickly pushes him over the edge. He ties Thomas to a chair and begins a very angry interrogation process, demanding Thomas tell him everything about his powers. Perhaps Henry doesn't quite understand exactly what it is he's asking for. Thomas easily provokes Henry into knocking him out cold. However, when Thomas regains consciousness, Henry is just further escalating his behavior. He's doused Thomas's home with fuel and lit it on fire, with his 2 daughters still inside. So, Thomas obliges his request to show him his powers. The spirit Thomas enters the mind of Henry and, just like Richard, sees the truth of his past and all his memories. However, unlike Richard, when spirit Thomas reaches the soul of Henry, he doesn't find a frightened child trying to flee from a monster. He finds a child, yes, his spirit, but This being is very aware of its nature. It has no guilt or remorse, no vulnerable emotions. It works in tandem with the monster of this place, a thing called the Hound. The two speak as one, in fact. The Hound corners Spirit Thomas. Back in reality, Henry and the real Thomas break apart from each other, and Henry has a complete breakdown. He goes for his weapon, now intent on killing Thomas. In the melee, Thomas this time overpowers the frantic Henry, beating him with a tool and leaving him to die in the shed near his house. Thomas runs outside to see his home burning, and he despairs at the all-consuming flames. He fears that it's too late. Even if he could enter the home, would his girls be alive? As Henry's life fades away, the last thing he witnesses is Thomas spring to life when Lillian calls to him from outside the home. But what Thomas does not heed is that his soulmate, Spirit Thomas, did not make it out of Henry's mind. He's trapped in the world of the Hound. He can't get out. Within the burning house, where Lillian and Marianne were alone, the Maw had come to Lillian to barter, if Lily should allow it, this tormented part of her spirit to be freed. Then in return, it would save Lily and her sister Marianne. And Lily agreed. And so that night, the Maw was released upon Neva. Taking possession of the people on the grounds of the resort, a massacre began. Lives taken in exchange for Lily and Marianne's. The Maw fed upon them, grew stronger with each victim. It broke and severed their spirits beyond repair, trapping them in its own perverted version of Neva. The event was covered up and unexplained. The government couldn't have known that all this stemmed from a demon spirit from beyond the veil, stepping into the real world through a broken little girl to wear human beings as skin so as to rain doom upon all within reach in Neva. But that's just what happened. Few survived the event. Neva was abandoned as a government facility. Only a few stayed on the site. Thomas left Marianne at a hospital, forfeiting her. The girl was left comatose after the fire. He reasoned that it would be better for her to forget her old life, to find a new path forward with a different family, away from him, and away from the nearly uncontainable Lillian, away from Neva. After the massacre, Thomas made use of that now completely abandoned bunker that was being cleared out in the forest near Neva. He converted one of the rooms into something completely blocked off from the other world, someplace the other side couldn't reach. Lily became more and more unstable and had to be confined in the bunker. Had to be confined to that room, cut off from the Maw and her sight as a medium. Though he doesn't abandon hope, he searches out ways to help his daughter. Without his other self, the Spirit Thomas, he knows he'll never succeed, though. He doesn't know where he went, but he knows that he has to search him out. They're two sides of the same coin. He's incomplete without him, but how else can he search for him other than going into the spirit world himself? Sometimes in his dreams, Thomas would see himself in that place, that other world, choking on dust, his lungs burning, and he sees his other self there, and he just says that, well, there's no helping it. After the massacre, one of the employees begs to stay on the grounds, a man named Francis, who sometimes is called Frank. He writes postcards to his wife, but never sends them. At first, they're very normal and innocent. Then they take on a much different tone. He writes as though he's very busy at Neva, very important and needed there, only sometimes acknowledging the deaths that took place. But eventually they fall into something maddening. Thomas knows that Francis is unstable, but he needs the extra hands on site. Frank knows that Lily is in a room in the depths of the bunker. He thinks she's fighting some sort of illness, and when Lily's 16th birthday approaches, Francis begins to experience the influences of the Maw, though extremely suppressed since it's disconnected from Lily. The Maw starts to push him to the brink of sanity. He begins to hear Lily's voice, begging him to let her out. Francis decides to help the girl. while Thomas is away, Francis goes into the bunker and opens the door where Lily is, releasing the Maw, though it is weakened, and there is very little around for it to feed off of. The Maw preys upon everything within and around the resort that has a pulse for 13 years. It is in 1999 that Thomas must put into motion the events of the game. Congrats, we've made it to the beginning of the medium. We open on a sad day in the life of a now adult Marianne. Marianne went on to be adopted by a man named Jack. Marianne did not retain any memories of her childhood and her family after the fire, and this was probably a blessing in disguise for the girl. While we don't know a lot about the details behind the relationship and her childhood, we know that his passing was devastating to Marianne. The two had a very strong and loving bond. From the first time Jack saw her as a child, he adored her. Even when her powers as a medium began to show, Jack helped her understand and tame them. Like Thomas, she sees that other place beyond the veil where souls reside, but unlike Thomas, she does not sever souls, nor does she walk as two independent but connected soulmates. The Marianne in the real world is the same Marianne that exists in the other place. One body, one being, walking on the same ground. She can untether her otherworldly self from her real self, but only for a short time. The loss of Jack truly breaks her heart, and helping him pass on, seeing his soul beyond the veil, was something she wasn't quite ready for. It's the same day that Thomas reaches out to Marianne. Thomas knew who adopted her, where she was at. He'd made sure to stay out of her life, to give her every chance possible at growing up normal, but today that changes. He's desperately manipulative over the phone, telling her that he knows what she is and he can give her all the answers she's been looking for all her life, and he references a reoccurring dream Marianne has suffered through, a dream in which a girl runs to a lakeside, onto a dock, where a man chases her down, pulls a gun on the girl, and shoots her dead. It all starts with a dead girl, he says. He directs her to the Neva resort. He needs her help. The light, it's almost gone. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there. You're the only one who can stop it. Well, who can resist an invitation like that? When Marianne arrives, she gets pulled into both worlds, in the heart of the Neva resort, and sees a rift of some sort. Now, this could be the place where the Maw tore through into the real world back in the 1980s when the massacre took place, though that's speculation. Let me know what you think this rift might be, if it's linked to Thomas or if it's linked to the Maw. It's really been bugging me. Within the abandoned, decaying Neva resort, Marianne is pulled again into both worlds, meeting a bouncing young girl who calls herself Sadness. Sadness has almost no memory of her life, but does recall that once upon a time, she had several friends here at the resort, but they're gone now. She doesn't remember where. She doesn't want to talk about it. She's here by herself now. And when Marianne asks if she recognizes the name Thomas, Sadness says that maybe there's a lead on the second floor. Sadness is actually the soul of Lillian, Marianne's sister, though Marianne does not know who Thomas is, does not know who Lillian is, and doesn't know what the Maw is. You could say the same thing about Sadness, really. She doesn't remember much of anything about her life as Lily, though there are little triggers around Neva that remind her of extremely negative emotions, or take her to the cusp of remembrance, something that the child soul very much wants to avoid. At the office door of Thomas Rekovich, Sadness still doesn't recognize the name, though feels quite uneasy about being here. She mentions that not too long ago there was an old man here, but she doesn't really remember much about him. And at this point in 1999, the real Thomas would be about 58 years old. Pretty safe bet that it's him, though at this point in the timeline, well, the spirit Thomas is still locked away within the world of the Hound. So, wait a second, was that the real Thomas walking in the soul world that Sadness resides in? Oh my. How interesting. Sadness vanishes when Marianne gets into Thomas's office. She wants nothing to do with that place. Inside, Marianne finds pictures of herself, spooky images of a child interacting with shadow beings, and photography in and around Neva. Now, we discover why Sadness fled this place. It is here. The Maw, being weepy and creepy in the spirit world. Marianne doesn't expect that this thing is dangerous. She's never faced with something like this before. But she learns real quick that this thing isn't friendly and would very much appreciate the opportunity to wear her like a skin suit for a few minutes. And he's very persistent about it. Its little tippy-tappy ballerina toes are all over the place as Marianne makes her way through the resort and searches out answers. It's got her scent, and is very interested in this powerful medium who's entered its territory. It just wants to try her on, and though this maw is weakened after years of little to feed on, it still shimmers into existence in the real world. It is exceedingly powerful and dangerous, though. After this meeting with the maw, perhaps by coincidence, Marianne finds that she can definitively pass through mirrors to exist exclusively in the spirit world. Before, the spirit being of herself was tethered to her living self. The living Marianne could exist exclusively without her spirit self present, but her spirit self could not exist in a space without her living body. But now, using these mirrors, she could. Through a radio, Sadness gets back in touch with Marianne in the real world, beckoning her to the day room within the resort to find Richard, but, well, who is Richard? Well, we know Richard already, but Marianne does not. When Marianne reaches the day room, finally, well, Sadness is there, yes, but when Marianne mentions Richard's name, Sadness recalls that Richard was smart and, well, maybe Richard could help her, except, well, Richard died. Something happened to him. She seems to remember little about him, until at the conclusion of their conversation when she remembers that Richard did something to her. So, was it actually Sadness on the radio? Or was it actually the real Thomas, walking in the spirit world? I would contend that it was Thomas pulling strings guiding Marianne to where she needed to be. Marianne now knows that the Maw is here, this dangerous spirit demon. Now she needed to discover what trauma instigated Lily's interaction with the Maw so long ago. They're all pieces to a puzzle, and she won't know what to do with them until the very end. We just have the benefit of knowing exactly where they all go. In the day room, Marianne finds clues to Richard's past and his relationship with Thomas. It was here that, after Thomas tore Richard's spirit from his body, that the hollow man was left to be taken care of by the nurse, Ursula. Rather than putting Richard into a nursing home, Thomas wanted to keep him close. Richard didn't have any family anyways, better to keep him at Neva. Marianne also finds the first clues to Richard's grooming of the young Lily, his using of her as a model like he did with Rose so long ago, her induction into his art classes, acknowledgement that the girl had friends other people couldn't see, the aftermath of an assault on the girl, and the Childeater. Looming outside the glass windows of the day room is the gluttonous, disgusting monster that Spirit Thomas met so long ago. Without Richard's soul, all that remains is this hideous thing, the Childeater. Marianne bears witness to a younger Thomas and his spirit self rummaging through Richard's office to find evidence of wrongdoing, of Thomas's attack into Richard's mind, the spirit Thomas tearing his soul from his body. She knows what this thing is now, the scraps of Richard's ugly soul. Childeater blames Lily for his current state. She's the reason behind Richard's fall. It's the girl's fault, and God, if Marianne doesn't smell just like her. But Marianne knows what and who the Childeater is and what it has done. It's a predator, and in the very least, it preyed upon a little girl, Thomas's eldest daughter, Marianne's older sister, though Marianne still doesn't know who Sadness is, who Lily is. Marianne still expresses outrage at the actions of this Childeater, and even now, festering in its own misery, the Childeater still blames Lily for Richard's actions. After all, according to the Childeater, well, she came to him, and where was her father? Where was Marianne? Shouldn't they have done something? They're just as guilty as Lily is. Just as guilty for what happened. And oh, Lily. Lily was the light of his life, the warmth of his soul. What a victim he is in all of this and what happened to her. But Marianne recognizes that this thing is just the remnants of what remains of his soul, his sins. Though Childeater knows that it's pathetic and sad, yet still it blames Thomas for putting him into this state. The Childeater begs Marianne to set him free from this place, to give him peace as she's done to so many left in Neva before him. But if she will not give him, then please, oblivion. Just give him oblivion to cease. Marianne refuses to give this thing any semblance of peace. It's far from deserving of such a thing, but oblivion? She'll give it nothingness. It's what a monster deserves. In its departure, the Childeater, Richard, calls her the girl from the red house. And now Marianne is beginning to recognize herself in images at Neva, beginning to understand that she has a history within this place, and knows that she must find where and what the red house is. Trekking through the forest near Neva, Marianne finds Francis, the man who wrote postcards to his family but never sent them, the man who released Lily from that bunker, released the Maw. He's apologizing from inside a tent for his actions before the massacre, apologizing to someone that he loves. He's still here, but he shouldn't be. He's being tormented by something. And he can see Marianne. If he can see Marianne, then something else can too. Inside the tent is his long-dead corpse, drained of its life like the wildlife around Neva. The Maw is close, hunting. It wore Francis for a while, but it outgrew him, just like all the others. Wore him out. It wants Marianne badly. It has her scent, one that's very, very familiar to it. It even uses Jack's voice to try and lure Marianne in, like a demon anglerfish. It's a tricksy thing, the Maw, and very focused on Marianne. Near the red house, Marianne finds Sadness, tells her that she sent Richard away, asks her to remember her past, and reminds her of her true name, Lillian. With her identity restored, and with Richard removed from this place, the little girl should be free to pass on, but something changes in Lily. A slight shift in vocal pitch, a calmness to contrast her previous skittishness. She can't leave, not yet. Regardless of her fear of the monster, the Maw. It doesn't need her anymore. It will have Marianne instead. A new suit to wear, a powerful medium. It's gone through so many, worn out so many skins, never able to break through the barrier fully. Measures were taken to keep Lily contained in Neva, and when those measures were compromised, when Lily was still young, well, the massacre happened. It was an unthinkable tragedy. Imagine if it could have Marianne, a powerful, capable medium. It would finally be able to leave this place, to not just shimmer in the real world, but to walk it as a being of its reality. Imagine the possibilities then. What could this thing called the Maw do within our living world if it could just put Marianne on? The killing would never end. Lily tells Marianne that this story is not just about Lily herself. Marianne must remember too. On to the red house she must continue. And at the red house, Marianne finds Henry Wilk's lighter, the one used to light the house on fire. Remember, Henry Wilk was the officer from the security service who sort of lost his mind when Thomas outmaneuvered him back in 1983. Thomas killed Henry, Henry housed the monster called the Hound within himself. The Hound did not let Spirit Thomas escape its world. Marianne experiences the memory of Henry, his encounter with Thomas, and his death, and then she meets the Hound. Oh, and the Hound is wonderfully antagonizing. The beast tells her that Thomas is gone from this place, and she asks the Hound what it did to Lillian. What the Hound did to them, to us, she says. Marianne is starting to understand her relationship to Thomas and to Lily. But the Hound informs her that, he was already dead before anything happened to Lily. The Hound taunts her forgetfulness. Little Marianne forgot her own daddy. He doesn't know who killed Lillian. Was it the nurse, the painter, the monster from under the bed? He really seems to enjoy rubbing Marianne's face in all of her perceived failures. Against the Hound's will, Marianne sends the beast away into nothingness just as she did to the Childeater. A monster like that does not deserve to peacefully pass on. And within the Red House, Marianne learns of what happened to Lily. Her powers were troubling for her. As Marianne has said before, as a child she saw things that could break a man. But Marianne went on to have Jack as an adoptive father. Lily's childhood was very, very different from hers. The death of her mother during Marianne's birth, not having a way to speak of the things she was seeing and experiencing, and Richard, that man, that mentor of her father, was using and hurting the girl. Imagine the confusion and the pain, feeling wordless and confused. And then the Maw arrives, so sickly sweet and understanding. Yes, now Marianne is beginning to understand. Beneath the remains of the Red House is a tunnel system leading to that bunker. By now it's flooded and in a poor state, but it's still traversable with some MacGyvering. The Maw is here, too, feverishly hunting Marianne. She's managed to dodge the demon time and time again, but it will not relent in the slightest in tracking this medium down. It certainly has patience, and as it blindly stalks through the tunnel passages underground, it switches between delicate invitations to approach and outright threats against Marianne. The thing is almost at a fever pitch in its obsession. Through the tunnels, reaching the bunker that Lily and Thomas shared while trying to starve out the Maw, Marianne finds a broken mirror, similar to the ones she's used to completely pass through into the spirit world. Through the mirror has come a familiar face, at least familiar to us. Spirit Thomas. With the vanquishing of the Hound at the Red House by Marianne, he's now free. Finally, after 16 years away from the real Thomas, trapped in a hellscape, he's finally out. But even free, back to where he belonged, he couldn't feel his other self. The real Thomas, his presence was just gone. He asks Marianne to please just sit with him for a short while and to tell him what's happened, how all this started. Spirit Thomas is adamant, insistent, that Thomas would never do anything to hurt Lily. No, Lily is most certainly still alive, and Marianne knows exactly where. It all starts with a dead girl. That lakeside. It's near this place, and Lily will be waiting for Marianne there. And something is approaching. The other Thomas sends Marianne away out of the bunker near the lakeside. He says it is coming, and he will hold it off, though when a spirit is butchered or sent away, as we saw with Richard, the body is left just a breathing meat bag. There's no one home. This leaves the fate of the Spirit Thomas ambiguous, or it leaves the relationship that the Spirit Thomas and the real Thomas have as undefined, should the real Thomas be able to exist without his soul. A gentle reunion takes place at the lakeside. After all, these two, they're practically strangers. But that resentment that Lily held towards Marianne when she was little is long, long gone. Lily explains that Marianne's forgetfulness is okay. At least she had a life for a while. The vision Marianne refers back to, the girl being shot at the lakeside, it's not a vision of what happened, but rather a vision of what Lily wants to happen. That little girl is Lily. The dream also expressed that Lillian wished that Thomas would have killed her. Because Lily still lives, the Maw cannot be sent away. Lily asks Marianne to kill her, to end the Maw. And who should appear to taunt and connive but the Maw itself, using Thomas's words from the beginning of the game as a jeer. The light is almost gone. Not dark yet, but it's getting there. Marianne sees another choice in this. It's a choice that is not of taking Lily's life, but rather her own. Lily's fate was bought when she was just a child during a night of terror during the fire, the night that the Maw truly took hold of her. The barter was also the salvation of Marianne. Lily saved her sister that night, and as a result, Marianne went on to have a semi-normalized childhood. She grew up with a loving father figure and had a functional life for many years, whereas Lily never had a chance. First losing her mother, and then her medium powers making a difficult childhood, then the abuse of Richard brought upon her, and then the fire, then the Maw, then the bunker. Lily never stood a chance. No one gave her one, unlike Marianne. If Marianne instead ends her own life, the Maw will starve out eventually. Lily will be freed of it when there's nothing else in Neva to consume. Then Lily will have a chance. Or is it that, with Lily gone, the Maw will need a new suit to wear, and Marianne is right there, and Lily begs her to set her free. And the trio chant to Marianne, "It all ends in me." The Maw, Lillian, and Sadness. It all ends in me. It has to be you. If Marianne shoots Lily, the Maw won't be stopped. The Maw will just go on to Marianne. Where does Lillian end and the Maw begin? This final sequence can be interpreted two very different ways. Sisterly love, doing what they have to for the other, self-sacrifice so the other may live, or a fight against the manipulations of a demon beside Lily. Yes, kill Lily. The Maw needs a new suit. Now, the receiver of the final shot is not known, at least not yet, but one has to ask, what would Thomas want the outcome to be? He knows better than anyone what's happening to Lily. He knows what happened at Neva. He knows that Marianne would end her search at this lakeside dock. Thomas isn't a fool, so what would Thomas desire for the final outcome? And that is a tough one. What circumstances he would brew up to solve this dilemma. In the final scene of the game, we see him walking away from Neva in the spirit world with that damned, unexplained rift in the background. No context of time is given to the sequence, so what is this living being doing here? And when is he here? The last we see of Thomas, he leans down and retrieves his now ticking pocket watch from the dirt.